The morning sun streamed into Carol Baker's kitchen, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Dressed in her hospital scrubs, her hair in a simple ponytail, Carol moved with the steady, gentle rhythm of a nurse who had spent 15 years mastering her craft. The sizzle of pancakes on the griddle was a familiar, comforting sound. "Emma, breakfast," she called upstairs. The immediate thunder of small feet answered her. Her 10-year-old daughter, Emma, burst into the kitchen, a whirlwind of energy with her mother's warm brown hair and her father's bright blue eyes. 2 more days until Thanksgiving break, Emma announced, sliding into her chair. "Are we going to Grandma's?" Carol's smile tightened slightly. "Yes, Grandma invited us." The words felt foreign. It was the first invitation in 3 years, a truce offered from the Cold War that was her relationship with her mother, Eleanor. Before she could say more, the hospital called. A colleague was sick. Could she come in early? "Of course. I'll be right there," Carol said, her eyes meeting Emma's. "Trish's mom will pick you up." "I'm sorry, sweetie." "It's okay, Mom," Emma said, a quiet understanding in her gaze that was beyond her years. She was accustomed to the rhythms of a life built by her mother's 2 hands. Driving to the hospital, Carol's mind drifted to the fragile threads of her life. Mike, her husband, living in another city for a temporary assignment that had stretched into 5 years. They weren't divorced, but they existed in a limbo of might-be's and maybes. Lately, the calls had been warmer, the conversations turning toward reconciliation. He had promised to join them at Thanksgiving, a prospect that filled her with both hope and dread. Her shift was a blur of controlled chaos, but Carol navigated it with her signature care and warm smile. On her way home, her sister, Donna, called. At 42, a partner at a prestigious law firm, Donna was the embodiment of everything their mother valued. "You're coming on Thursday, right?" "Mom's in a state," Donna said, her voice polished and efficient. "Yes, we're coming. Mike will be there too, after he finishes work." "Mike?" The surprise in Donna's voice was a sharp, familiar sting. "Are you too?" "We're talking," Carol said, her tone closing the subject. At home, she found Emma diligently doing her homework. "What should we bring to Grandma's?" Carol asked, stroking her daughter's hair. "Pumpkin pie, and we have to show them my school project photos." Emma's eyes shone with excitement, a light Carol was determined to protect. Even as a shadow of anxiety chilled her own heart, she remembered the last Thanksgiving 3 years ago, the subtle cuts of her mother's condescension, the feeling of being an outsider in her own family. On Thanksgiving morning, Carol scrutinized her reflection. She'd chosen a soft blue dress and a simple silver necklace. Emma was radiant in her favorite red dress, her hair woven with tiny, careful braids. "You look beautiful," Carol said, her hand resting on Emma's shoulder. "So does the pie." They loaded their homemade offerings into the car and drove to the affluent Boston suburb where Carol had grown up. Her parents' stone mansion stood, imposing and refined, a monument to her mother's social aspirations. Carol took a deep breath, squeezing Emma's hand before ringing the bell. The door swung open to reveal Eleanor. At 65, she was a vision of calculated elegance, from her pearl necklace to her tailored tweed suit. "Oh, you're early," she said, the greeting as chilly as the November air. "Thank you for having us, Mother," Carol replied, her smile strained. "Hello, Grandma," Emma chirped. Eleanor offered a pat on the head before ushering them inside. The living room was a tableau of familial chatter, centered around Donna, her husband, and their 2 children. Only Carol's father, Walter, a quiet university professor, stood to envelop them in a genuine hug. "I'm glad you came," he whispered, his voice thick with an unspoken apology. Carol presented their gifts. "We brought a pie, and some photos of Emma's projects." Eleanor took them and set them aside without a glance. "Speaking of achievements, did you hear Jason took first in the state mock trial competition?" she announced to the room, seamlessly diverting the attention to Donna's son. As the afternoon wore on, Carol and Emma sat adrift on a small sofa, islands in the river of family conversation. Emma's attempts to engage her cousins were met with polite indifference. When dinner was announced, the family migrated to the dining room, where a grand oak table gleamed under the soft light of candles. As everyone found their seats, Emma made a beeline for 2 empty chairs near her cousins. Not there. You too. Eleanor's voice cut through the chatter. She pointed to a small folding table, its plastic chairs shoved into the hallway between the kitchen and the dining room. It was a place for coats and handbags, not for people. Carol's blood ran cold. Mother? You should be grateful I prepared a spot for you at all, Eleanor said with a dismissive shrug. The quiet humiliation was a physical blow. Carol saw the confusion and hurt dawn on Emma's face. Walter looked down at the turkey he was carving, his silence a louder betrayal than any word. Wordlessly, Carol took Emma's hand and led her to the folding table. Her heart shattered as she watched her daughter process this deliberate exclusion. Then the food was served. To the main table, Walter carried platters of steaming turkey, glistening gravy, and golden casseroles. To Carol and Emma, a relative placed 2 plates holding only cold mashed potatoes and a few sparse vegetables. Mom, Emma whispered, her voice small and tight. Is this all? In that moment, a lifetime of slights and condescension crystallized into a fierce, protective resolve. The meekness she'd worn like a shield fell away. She slowly stood, her chair scraping softly against the floor. Emma, she said, her voice clear and steady, we're leaving. The room fell into a stunned silence. Carol handed Emma a small, folded note. Give this to Grandma. Thank her for the invitation. Emma, wide-eyed but trusting, walked to her grandmother and pressed the note into her hand. Before Eleanor could react, Carol had already guided Emma to the foyer. The sound of the heavy front door closing behind them echoed like a final judgment. Outside, the cold air was a baptism. As Carol's car pulled away from the curb, a strange sense of liberation washed over them, mingling with the hurt. Eleanor, flustered, tried to regain control. She always was so dramatic, she muttered, attempting to tuck the note away. But Carol's Aunt Marge was quicker. What does it say, Eleanor? She plucked the paper from her sister-in-law's hand, donned her glasses, and read aloud to the captive audience. Grandma, why do you hate Mom? Mom is always crying, but we are strong. The words hung in the air, suffocating and absolute. Donna covered her mouth with her hand. Stanley looked away, ashamed, and Walter, for the first time in decades, finally found his voice. Eleanor, he said, his quiet tone trembling with a lifetime of suppressed fury. This ends, now. Carol drove until she saw the warm, glowing sign of the Bluebird Diner, an oasis on the quiet holiday street. Inside, the booths were crowded with others seeking refuge from traditional gatherings. A waitress named Doris, whose smile Carol recognized from the hospital, led them to a table. Thanksgiving specials on me tonight, dear, she said, her kind eyes seeing right through Carol's brave face. As they waited for their food, Carol texted Mike a brief explanation. Halfway through a surprisingly delicious meal, Emma looked up, her expression solemn. Mom, she said, I wrote that note myself. Carol's fork stilled. What did it say, exactly? Emma recited it perfectly, her voice clear and unwavering. Grandma, why do you hate Mom? Mom is always crying, but we are strong. I've seen you, she added softly, after you talked to her on the phone. Tears welled in Carol's eyes, spilling over. She reached across the table, grasping her daughter's hands. The pain of being seen in her weakness was eclipsed by the overwhelming pride for the strong, resilient girl she had raised. Oh, Emma, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, you are my strength. Outside, the world was cold, but inside the diner, surrounded by the clatter of plates and the murmur of strangers, they had found something far more nourishing than any Thanksgiving feast, a family of 2, whole and unbreakable. The silence Mike left behind in the living room was heavier than any argument. Walter's voice, trembling with a courage he hadn't mustered in 40 years of marriage, broke it. Determination? Carol is our daughter. Eleanor, Emma is our granddaughter. And you, he choked, his hand gesturing weakly towards the wretched folding table, the evidence of her cruelty. Eleanor's defense was a brittle, rehearsed script. She's the one who shattered our family's image, marrying beneath her, living in this limbo. She is a disgrace to the family name. A disgrace? The word was torn from Marge, Carol's aunt and Eleanor's oldest friend. Her face was pale with disgust. The only disgrace here is you, Eleanor. To exile a child to a folding table? To serve them scraps? As your friend, I am telling you, this was monstrous. The room fractured. Muttered agreements warred with uncomfortable silences. The family's long-hidden fault lines were now chasms, visible to all. In the ensuing quiet, a small, clear voice piped up. 8-year-old Lily, Donna's daughter, tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mom," she asked, her brow furrowed in confusion, "why don't we ever play with Emma? You always say, later." Donna looked from her daughter's innocent face to her son Jason's equally questioning one, and then to the empty space where her sister had been. The reflection in the polished tabletop showed her a woman she no longer recognized, complicit, cold, and hollow. She had no answer. When the doorbell rang, Walter opened it to find Mike, still in his work clothes, his face etched with the fatigue of a long drive. "Walter, where are Carol and Emma?" "They left," Walter stammered, his shame a palpable force. Mike's expression darkened. What happened? He was led into the tension-charged living room. Before Eleanor could spin her version, Marge stood, a righteous fury in her eyes. She handed Mike the now crumpled note. "Read this, then look at that table in the hallway." Mike's eyes scanned the words. "Grandma, why do you hate Mom? Mom is always crying, but we are strong." The paper trembled in his hand. When he looked up, his calm demeanor had been replaced by a cold, focused anger. "Is this how you treat your family?" His voice was low, a controlled tremor of rage, directed solely at Eleanor. "This has nothing to do with you and your failed marriage," she sniffed. "This stopped being about our marriage the moment you hurt my daughter," he corrected, his voice sharp as a scalpel. "I have failed Carol in many ways, but I will not fail her now by staying silent. If you cannot see the incredible women they are, then you don't deserve to be in their lives." He pocketed the note, a sacred piece of evidence. "Consider our family connection severed." With a curt nod to the stunned relatives, he turned and left. Walter watched him go, then turned to his wife. The years of capitulation ended in a single, quiet sentence. "I'm going, too." He took his coat and walked out, leaving Eleanor alone in the ruins of her perfect dinner. In the warm, fragrant embrace of Carol's living room, the world outside had been muted. Emma was nestled between her parents on the sofa, a contented sigh escaping as she ate the cake Mike had brought. On the coffee table, Carol's phone lit up like a distress beacon. "Missed call, Mom, Donna, Dad," but she ignored its frantic pulsing. "Aren't you going to get that?" Mike asked, his gaze soft on her. "Not today," Carol said, her voice laced with a newfound peace. "Today is just for us." She returned from the kitchen with 3 mugs of hot chocolate, a small fleet of marshmallows bobbing on the surface. "Dad," Emma asked, her voice hopeful, "will you stay tomorrow?" Mike exchanged a look with Carol, who gave a small, genuine smile. "If it's okay with your mom." "Actually," Mike began, his posture straightening. He pulled a small envelope from his pocket. "I have something to tell you both. I'm giving up my apartment in San Diego. The lease ends next month. I'd like to move back here, if you'll have me." Emma gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Carol was speechless, tears welling in her eyes. After 5 years of lonely strength, this was the anchor she hadn't dared to hope for. "My couch is always available," she finally managed, her voice thick with emotion. "The best Thanksgiving ever," Emma cried, launching herself into a group hug that felt like coming home. The next morning, Carol woke to the sound of laughter and the smell of pancakes. The peace she felt was so profound it was almost dizzying. The doorbell broke the spell. She tightened her robe and opened the door to find her father, Walter, standing there. He looked 10 years older, his eyes shadowed with a sleepless night. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice thin and frayed. He sat on the sofa, a man diminished. "I have owed you an apology for 30 years, he began, his clasped hands white-knuckled. "I was a coward. I hid behind my books and my silence, and I let her break your spirit because I was too weak to protect you." A tear traced a path down his cheek. That note from Emma, it broke me. She saw the truth I was too afraid to face. Carol listened, the old anger softening into a painful empathy. Mike brought coffee and sat beside her, a silent pillar of support. "Your mother, she is a product of her own wounds," Walter continued. "Her mother was the same, but that is an explanation, Carol, not an excuse, for me, or for her." A week later, an unexpected figure stood at Carol's door. Eleanor, looking strangely small without her usual armor of certainty, clutched a paper bag. "May I come in?" Her voice was stripped of its command. Inside, Emma instinctively moved closer to Mike. "What do you want, Mother?" Carol asked, her arms crossed. "Your behavior was," Eleanor began automatically, then stopped. She took a shuddering breath. "No, that's not why I'm here." "Grandma," Emma said, stepping forward with a child's terrifying honesty, "please don't make my mom cry anymore." The words landed not as an accusation, but as a plea. Eleanor's composure cracked. She knelt, bringing herself to Emma's eye level. "Grandma was wrong." Mike, who had been a quiet observer, spoke gently. "She sees things clearly, Eleanor, more clearly than any of us." Eleanor stood and offered the bag to Carol. "For Emma, I knitted it." Carol was stunned. She took out a small, beautifully hand-knitted sweater. "My mother believed love was a distraction," Eleanor whispered, the confession costing her dearly. "I thought I was making you strong. I was only making you lonely." "This doesn't fix everything," Carol said, her voice firm but not unkind. "But if you want to start, truly start, with Emma, you are welcome." It was not forgiveness, but it was a door, left slightly ajar. 1 year later, the first snow of winter dusted Boston as Carol's apartment buzzed with joyful chaos. Mike was basting a turkey, and an 11-year-old Emma was expertly setting the table. "Blue or white tablecloth, Mom?" "Blue is perfect, sweetheart." The doorbell rang in a steady stream. Walter arrived first, bearing wine and a new, confident energy. Donna came with her family, offering Carol a tentative, sincere hug. The repair of their sisterhood was a work in progress, but the foundation was being laid. Finally, Eleanor arrived, dressed simply, holding a gift bag. When Emma saw her, she ran and wrapped her in a full, unreserved hug. "You came, Grandma." A genuine, surprised smile touched Eleanor's lips. She gave Emma the bag, which held a hand-knitted scarf and a note that simply read, "I am learning." Before the feast began, they all gathered around one table. Emma, asked to say grace, looked around at her family, flawed, healing, but together. "I'm thankful that Grandma is learning to change, that Grandpa found his voice, that Mom smiles all the time now, that Dad came home, and that we all get to be here, together." Tears shone in Carol's eyes as Mike pulled her close. Across the table, Walter reached for Eleanor's hand, and she let him take it, a single tear tracing its way down her cheek. Warm mashed potatoes were served to everyone. There was no such thing as a perfect family, Carol thought, watching her daughter laugh, but there were second chances, and the brave, imperfect love that built a new one, piece by piece, and that was the truest meaning of Thanksgiving.